The next item of business is a statement by Fergus Ewing on the final report of the Women in Agricultural Taskforce. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions and interruptions. And I call on Fergus Ewing, Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to lay before Parliament the final report of the Women in Agriculture Task Force, which was established by the First Minister in June 2017. I want to set out some of its key findings, but before I do, a few observations and thank yous are very much in order. It's been my absolute privilege to co-chair the Women in Agriculture Task Force. I can't claim to have been its driving force. That role has been undertaken with characteristic enthusiasm and skill by Joyce Campbell, and I want to thank her and all of the members of the task force as well for giving so generously of their time, their skills, knowledge and experience. I think it would be fair to say that some members at least have been on their own journey of discovery. They arrived with ideas and views that have been challenged and changed along the way, and for me, that's a sure sign that the task force has actually achieved its objectives. The debate has been robust at times, and the work has been rigorous to test ideas to assess their merits and practical application. I also want to thank government officials who have applied themselves fully to supporting the task force and its work, and all the businesses, organisations and individuals, including the Women in Agriculture group, for their work and input. There is no doubt that women are absolutely key to Scottish agriculture, undertaking as they do a range of roles as owners, tenants, workers directly on farms and crofts, but they are also increasingly involved in the supply chain, providing goods and services surrounding agriculture and food production. They are employed too in key stakeholder organisations, but there is still a breakthrough to be made in terms of women occupying visible leadership roles in equal numbers to men across the industry. As the research reports on women in farming and the agricultural sector, which was published in June 2017, states, there are a range of barriers at work here, not least a fundamental and deep-rooted level of conscious and unconscious bias in how organisations operate, are structured and act. That is why this government is funding pilot activity with a range of organisations to effect change. The task force also debated and considered the issue of quotas for women in positions of leadership in the industry. We concluded that the starting point for change should be to create a suite of practical measures that the industry could engage with voluntarily. Now, that does not mean that the government will not act in future if change continues to be slow, but it does mean that the status quo is no longer acceptable. This need for everyone to embrace and facilitate change is a core conclusion running throughout the task force's report. There is certainly more for government to do. That is why the Scottish Government will take the lead in piloting the Equality Charter for Scottish agriculture. The Charter will set out key ways that businesses and organisations of any size can work towards greater equality and support positive change that benefits their business. We will test it and review it by 2022 and expect every organisation participating in government-led groups to be able to evidence compliance with the Charter by the end of that year. As well as creating the right environment which enables women to participate equitably, we also need to ensure more women in agriculture get the support they need to build their capacity and skills to succeed. Presiding Officer, this government has already agreed to create a Women in Agriculture development programme that is accessible and delivers training and mentoring to support women to build their confidence, enhance their business skills and develop their leadership abilities. We have also committed funding for the pilots of 3 specific independent courses in the programme. And I can advise Parliament today that we've appointed Sheila Campbell-Lloyd of Innerworks Coaching Limited to deliver the Be Your Best Self training pilot. It will be open to all women within agriculture to help them build more confidence, explore new possibilities, opportunities and make new connections. Presiding Officer, I hope very much that this development programme will provide one of the quick wins that will make a real difference for women in agriculture. There is no doubt some of the other recommendations will take longer to effect. In the coming months, this government will engage with key bodies such as the Law Society for Scotland, SRUC, the Agriculture Industries Confederation, and the Health and Safety Executive to develop shared approaches to implementing the recommendations on succession and health and safety. And as part of our work on future policy on farming and food production, we will explore and consider how to deliver recommendations on new entrants. It is clear that the land matching service can play a role here. There is no doubt that cultural change on this scale requires time, and the report recognises this. However, we are already starting to see an impact from the range of activity being driven by women in agriculture, which is encouraging many organisations and businesses to change. But I want to be absolutely clear, Presiding Officer, change must come, and doing nothing is not an option. Scottish agriculture is the beating heart of rural Scotland and the food engine for Scotland and the global export market. But it's also the last male stronghold. Make no mistake, Scottish agriculture is full of women and girls who are skilled and able, but not all of them have the opportunities they are capable of and which they deserve. Inequality is entrenched and embedded and simply cannot be allowed to continue. This government wants to see a fairer rural Scotland, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also to allow the rural economy and communities to thrive. Scotland needs an agricultural industry that is sustainable, profitable, able to make the most of its resources to compete competitively, and which is resilient and inclusive. It's neither acceptable nor business savvy for agencies, organisations and businesses operating in Scottish agriculture today to be effectively male-only. If we can help them to be better and more equitable, then we should do so. But these agencies, organisations and businesses also need to hear clearly that men-only boards and governance structures must be consigned to the past. Scottish agriculture simply cannot afford to leave women behind. Changing a centuries-old culture will involve significant work. Crucially, it will require everyone with a stake and an interest in the future of agriculture in Scotland to work together. Together we can do this, but alone we will fail. Finally, Presiding Officer, I hope Parliament will lend its support to that work and play its part in making change and equality happen for women in agriculture.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I call Peter Chapman to be followed by Colin Smith. Mr Chapman.
Presiding Officer, I need to declare an interest as a partner in a farming business, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for prior sight of his statement. And this is indeed a very welcome and important piece of work, and I thank the members of the Taskforce for their efforts to get this far. I was pleased to be at the launch of this strategy document last night at Ingleston and was able to speak to many of the women who did the hard work to make this Taskforce a success, and in particular to listen to the excellent speech from the Vice-Chair, Joyce Campbell. And many of these women have already made their mark within the industry, but we need more of them. There is a great and pressing need to change the culture in farming circles and to better recognise and harness the huge benefits that women can bring to our industry. But we all know that changing cultures can take a long time. I am pleased the Taskforce has rejected the idea of quotas for women in leadership positions in our industry, and I think that assisting women with their training needs is a better way forward. And the suite of training proposed under the Women in Agriculture Development Programme is, I believe, an excellent initiative. Now, much of this is proposed to be funded by the Scottish Government in partnership with the applicants and the industry. So can the Cabinet Secretary give us some indication of the levels of funding being considered by the Government to deliver this important programme?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Mr Chapman for his welcome of the Women in Agriculture Taskforce report, and as he says, he was there yesterday evening and heard the co-chair Joyce Campbell make an excellent speech, and it was terrific that we and other MSPs were able to thank personally the many members of the task force who were there yesterday evening. And I'm pleased also that Mr Chapman recognises that the training segment of the recommendations is important. The put-in summary, the training will look to enhance and develop people's skills as individuals, also to assist their leadership role and help to develop necessary business skills which can directly play a part in enhancing their contribution to farms as a business. So in all those respects, the training will be useful. The commitment is that we have made in terms of the programme for government is for £200,000 for 2019 and 20, and £300,000 per annum for 2020 to 2024. So the funding is, in the government terms, relatively modest, but I think we will get a substantial result from that, and we will closely be monitoring how the programmes work, what the response is. We will obviously be getting feedback from those who participate in the courses to make sure that it's delivering the goods. So I appreciate Mr Chapman's general approach here.
Colin Smith, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the advance sight of his statement. Can I also place on record my appreciation to all members of the Women in Agriculture Taskforce for their work and very welcome comprehensive report. There are many practical recommendations in this report, but ultimately what it points to is the need for fundamental cultural change. Too often we hear the excuse that women can't be found to take leadership positions within the sector when little is done to break down the barriers they face or tackle the bias, conscious or unconscious, that actually prevents the best person taking those roles. Not only is that blatant discrimination, it means the industry foregoes an enormous talent pool and is poorer for it. Now, on the specific recommendations, I note the report highlights that supporting new entrants is an important way to bring more women and a greater gender balance into the sector. But the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that 3 new entrant schemes have been closed since 2018. So can he tell us whether there are any plans to reopen them? The Cabinet Secretary will also aware that there remains a pay gap within the sector of around 12.5%. So can he tell us what the Government is doing to close that pay gap?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do agree with Mr Smith that cultural change is necessary. And I think as well as containing recommendations which are designed specifically to assist women to achieve further their enormous potential, the culture change will require men to think differently as well. And I think that's recognised. And as a bloke doing this statement, Presiding Officer, I'm highly conscious of that too. To answer his question, we've just very recently launched the matching and mentoring scheme at a farm in central Scotland, where a farmer who wished to withdraw from being a full-time farmer was able to meet a new entrant, a young fellow, a young couple actually, and that matching and mentoring scheme has just been launched. We have the assistance of Ian Davidson, who will guide the mentoring aspect. And I think that's a very practical approach. It's not an easy thing to do, of course, but it's a very practical approach. The recommendations of this report with regard to new entrants are on paragraph 7 of the report, and recommends that we must promote and encourage innovative routes to access land and capital to overcome recognised barriers for women new entrants, and also that we must address the skills gap facing some women new entrants to agriculture in the areas of business skills and confidence. So those were the recommendations in this report. Plainly, Mr Smith's questions really relate to a wider question of support for new entrants. The schemes which we had in Scotland were the only ones in the UK and which had some success. But I think we recognise that moving on from that, we've got to tackle the problem of succession and encourage new entrants to come in to assist them with their skills, and we will certainly be doing that in the years to come.
Maureen Watt, followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, after decision time, we debated 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. In the evening at Ingleston, we learned from the co-chair of the task force, Joyce Campbell, of the threats, intimidation and bullying directed at her and other members of the task force from members of the agricultural community, both male and female. Is it not time that some people join the 21st century, recognise things have to change for the benefit of the future of agricultural Scotland? And what can the government do to assist in this matter?
Well, talking about sort of wider things, but I think it is connected. So, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yes, I believe it is, and Joyce Campbell said last night, and Maureen Watt was also present at the reception in Ingleston House, that she had experienced this type of behaviour. It's completely unacceptable that women in agriculture are facing harassment, intimidation and bullying. And one of the things we're doing to tackle this is to fund a training pilot to address unconscious bias for up to 10 businesses and organisations. The first training session has already taken place with Taskforce, Machinery Ring and other organisations which have already signed up are Dingwall Highland Mart, United Auctions, Scottish Land and Estates, Highland Machinery Ring and W&A Geddes. So, I'm pleased that before the publication of this report today, already there is an interest and an agreement that this training will be delivered. And I think this will take some time to affect societal change. It won't happen overnight, Presiding Officer, but we were determined that it will happen, and we're taking positive, practical steps there and end.
Rachel Hamilton, followed by Emma Harper. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I just take this opportunity to pay tribute to all those women working in agriculture, including my mother, who's kept my father, who is a farmer, on the straight and narrow. I don't think he would be here today without her, and neither my brother as the successor, because she makes sure he's got the cattle passports, she makes sure that he's got enough money to buy the cows, and we should pay tribute to all women in agriculture, which we are doing today. As a former agronomist and a working mother, I sympathise greatly with some of the sentiments and the recommendations within this report. On page 17 of this report, it highlights that the picture is unclear when it comes to rural childcare provision. 54% of respondents identified that a lack of childcare limits their potential in agriculture. And whilst I appreciate that this cuts across the Cabinet Secretary portfolio, and so does the other recommendations within this report from the Taskforce, I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he agrees with me that the delays to roll out of 1140 hours will have a pronounced effect on the ambitions of women hoping to seek and secure a career in agriculture.
Again, I do think there is a connection with encouraging women in. So,
well, in response to Rachel Hamilton's question, I think she is right that adequate childcare is something that is a key facet here, and not only childcare, but looking after others, elderly parents, for example, who may require care too, or those with a disability. So this is part of the overall picture, and that's why, Presiding Officer, in the report in paragraph 5, the recommendations include that we must increase the availability and access to formal and informal childcare to better enable women to engage in training, networking and to develop business opportunities. And we and local authorities must consider how childcare services can be more closely tailored to suit demand in rural areas. Agricultural households need child sitting out with standard working hours in the evenings and early mornings, and that's a further challenge which is not necessarily present in an urban environment. And also, many farms are remotely located, and therefore accessing this childcare is a practical issue. So I don't underestimate the challenges or the scale of them, Presiding Officer, but this report does very much recognise that this is a key area on which we need to improve, and I know that my colleagues who have direct responsibility for childcare are cited in this report, and we will be working together to ensure that they are properly implemented.
Emma Harper, followed by Claire Baker. Ms Harper.
Thank you. I attended the launch of the Women in Agriculture report last night, and I also want to thank Joyce Campbell and all the members for their fabulous work, and the Cabinet Secretary too, of course. One of the key opportunities and challenges for the future, outlined in page 20 of the report, is to encourage more young women into the industry as new entrants. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore outline any additional ways, as well as the mentoring scheme, to enable more women as new entrants?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I've already touched on this in the answer to Mr. Smith's question that there is an urgent need to do that, and of course one of the issues that the report recognises is that the succession process is in itself sometimes a challenge to enabling new entrants, and that's a matter in part of taking legal advice, as the report recognises. It's in part addressing each farmer to address the issue of succession at at a reasonably early date and plan ahead, and that was very much part of the report. The report also does recommend that we must address the skills gap facing some women new entrants to agriculture, and that means being able practically to access training courses and programmes, both the ones that are set out in this report and other wider training programmes that are available, for example, through SRUC and other Atlantra and others. There are a whole series of ways in which we need to encourage new entrants, and in particular female new entrants, into agriculture, and we fully intend to work on all of them.
Claire Baker, followed by Mark Ruskell.
Presiding Officer, how do you challenge a system where the best person for the job is always a man? While the training opportunities being introduced for women are welcome, I do have concerns that the timescale to review the impact of the Charter is 2027. That is some 8 years away. And if participation in formal Scottish Government agricultural stakeholder groups is the lever for delivering compliance with the Equality Charter, what percentage of the Scottish farming sector does this apply to? What is the level of engagement with formal stakeholder groups?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, this autumn the Scottish Government will start piloting the Equality Charter for Scottish agriculture. The pilot will run until the end of 2021 to enable the Charter to be fully tested, to ensure that it works for all types and sizes of agricultural business and organisation. The Charter will support businesses and organisations to become more supportive and inclusive. We believe that that will actually benefit farms and farming enormously by leading to greater efficiencies, greater business success, by increasing the role further that women are playing. So, whilst we have set out 2027 as a sort of long stop date, we will not be waiting until then to ensure that this work is successful. I believe it will be successful long before then, and we will make sure that the Charter is fully explained to all stakeholders, as Claire Baker said, and we will work with them to deliver that. So I'm immensely optimistic and positive about the Equality Charter for Scottish agriculture.
Mark Ruskell, followed by Mike Rumbles.
The government's own Women in Agriculture and Farming Sector report in 2017 said, and I quote, that the passing on of large farms intact to one son is the single biggest barrier to women's entry into agriculture. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if the government will act on the long-standing recommendation to update the law of succession to give children, including daughters, equal right to inherit, and also to then remove that top barrier to women's participation in agriculture?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Taskforce had lively discussions about this topic, and the Taskforce discussions recognise that family discussions about succession are often avoided simply because they may involve conflict. These can be inherently sensitive issues. The Taskforce recommended that whilst it's perceived that drawing up a will is expensive, this need not be the case. And the practicality of preparing a will is often the most basic and sensible thing that can be done, so that the intentions are absolutely clear in respect of succession. The Taskforce took the view that it's cultural change that we need to bring about here, and that underlies the fundamental issue which Mr Ruskell identified, as was stated in the research in 2017. So it's the culture that must change here, and that is the primary area where we will be seeking to address and to bring about change.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Gillian Martin.
On page 13 of the report, it says that, and I quote, any industry training provider in receipt of public funds should be required to make their training accessible and inclusive to tackle unconscious bias. Absolutely right. But in the very next paragraph, it says, and I quote again, a Scottish Government programme should be put in place to financially incentivise the provision of women-only courses. I want to ask the Cabinet Secretary, will this compartmentalisation of women really be the best way to change the male-orientated culture, which there undoubtedly is in the industry?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the view of the task force was that in some instances women-only courses would be the most efficacious, and that's why the report contains that recommendation. As far as whether that in itself would prevent the achievement of bringing about cultural change, I would respectfully disagree. I mean, I do think the issue of cultural change is actually necessary to bring about in males, by and large, to address issues of prejudice, chauvinism, and views which are those which really belong in a previous century to this one. So I don't think that having women-only courses would be inimical or prevent or hinder achievement of the overall aim. But I mean, I understand the point that Mr Rumbles makes.
Gillian Martin, followed by Edward Mountain.
Presiding Officer, apologies for repeating a similar question that Mark Ruskell has around succession, but one of the key recommendations of the research on women for farming, which the First Minister launched in June 2017, was to address issues in succession. Yet the task force has not taken this much further forward. Can you further explain the thinking behind that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the task force did take the view that the real issue is the existing culture of some, that the views, for example, that men as the heirs to a business, or should be heirs to a business, is the real cultural issue that needs to change, together with the current lack of succession planning by families on cross smallholdings and farms. And plainly, the recommendations, therefore, focus on asking the industry to engage in awareness raising and providing the right advice and support to farmers, crofters and smallholders. And lawyers have a role to play. And one of the actions for government will be to engage with the Law Society and others to explore how best to go about raising awareness and providing appropriate advice and information.
Edward Mountain, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too welcome the report, and I should declare an interest that I am a partner in a farming business, which my wife is running ably in my absence. I'd like to welcome the acknowledgement that there is a need for a growing and vibrant, forward-thinking, representative and inclusive agricultural industry in Scotland. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me? One of the biggest barriers to this is the lack of profitability, and therefore this is one of the many things we also need to address.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I'm sure Mr Mountain's business is now in good hands. I think you kind of walked into that one, I think. No, but seriously, I think Mr Mountain makes a fair point. Of course we want businesses, whether they be farms, crofts or anything else, to be successful, and that means making a profit, and we're absolutely focused on that, and hardly a day goes by without my engaging with farmers about how to take up some of the marvellous innovations that are coming forward, particularly from the younger cohort of farmers, and put them into practice and provide, where government support is required, it's not always required, provide that support. But as a long term, I very much want to see farmers getting the kind of fair share of the kind of market benefits of, for example, beef and red meat. It's a very live issue at the moment, and I'm acutely conscious that this is one of the things that we do need to tackle. And the last thing I would say is that, you know, this report shouldn't be reviewed as a challenge or a nuisance or whatever. This is an opportunity for farms where there is a female involved, whether it be wife, partner, sister, mother, or a number, to make an even greater contribution to help them achieve more and thereby increase the profitability of the business in the bygoing.
Last question, Alistair Allen.
On the Task Force's recommendations on childcare, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how these relate to the Scottish Government's groundbreaking commitments to 1,140 hours, but also whether it will consider how these very issues impact on its own policies when it comes to encouraging new entrants?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, yes, that is of course correct. That's the aspiration, and it is there for the very practical purpose of enabling women to achieve their potential across all areas of life and business in Scottish society, but is a particularly acute challenge for the reasons I sought to give in my response to Rachel Hamilton's question earlier. So I'm very pleased, Presiding Officer, that there has been such a welcome of the excellent work that Joyce Campbell and her team have done, and the recommendations on childcare are one of several recommendations that one of the recommendations that we will certainly be keen to take forward as swiftly as we can.
Thank you. And that concludes the questions on the statement.